Hello.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'll put this back in the chat if I can access the chat again, which I'm not sure I'm seeing, but I can walk us through that list because I think, did the chat disappear for everyone?
But we're
It
following the
did.
one in the agenda, right?
Yes, I apologize. I was reformatting and I think it gave different numbers when I was trying to add in the correct, the new things, but I'm not seeing a chat option to give you a visual of it. But I can walk us through the list. Again, it was continuing from number 5 onwards. Does that sound okay with you all?
I can
It's back
share
now.
my screen if you want.
Oh, it is back now. Okay, cool. Great.
Yeah, I just
Oh, yes,
put it in
there
the
it
chat.
is.
I was able
There
to find
is.
it.
Thank you. I think I couldn't initiate the chat. And Derek, does this look right to you? Is that aligns with the agenda, with the exception of the addition to 8 and then the addition of 11 and 12?
Yeah, this is the
Or,
one that you said last in the work group before we switched to rooms. I was able to
got
locate
it.
that.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Okay. And I think, again, we could always go back. I'll just record whatever comes up if, we go between different topics, of course. Shall we pick up with number 5 on the vital record system needs reciprocity with neighboring states and ideas around how to meet that need?
I guess I just have a question first,
Mhm.
maybe especially for those who are with vital records here. What are some of the, or I guess what's the process now with working with other states, and where are kind of the common sticking points? Because I mean, maybe that's the point where we're trying to resolve. So I'm just kind of maybe saying, what are the roadblocks now that we can maybe brainstorm some ideas that might, remove them.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that question as well, because I think that this was brought up as sort of funeral home roadblocks that you see when, like a death occurs just across the border in Washington. And so I'm actually not totally sure what those roadblocks are. I think it gets really difficult with, states having different laws. We don't really have any control over them and changing them. Making sure that they match up, I think it becomes pretty difficult. So I'm a bit at a loss for this one.
Okay. Well, with that, thanks, Derek. And I think with that context, I can maybe address a bit of that, just kind of, knowing kind of, I don't know the whole process, but I know how funeral directors often interact with out-of-state deaths and that type of thing. I mean, ultimately, the challenges, although maybe somewhat similar, each state tends to be different with their laws and rules with a lot of things. So I think with Washington, they use, I think, is it called EDRS? I think that, and so I think it's required that the medical certifier, signs off on that electronically, which makes things much more convenient. I think that's some of the other things we've talked about, kind of making it fully electronic. Like, 'cause I think Oregon is one, we don't require that, and that causes often the delay when the doctor won't sign up for overs and won't electronically sign off on, and then it causes delays. So I think one thing is, it's just kind of the nature of different working with different states. I mean, it's just, you have to abide by that state. And if there's other requirements, you kind of rely on, I mean, if someone dies in another state and then they're being brought to Oregon for burial or cremation or whatever, you're kind of at the mercy of that state, of that, that kind of maybe that neighboring funeral home. Let's say someone dies in Washington, typically a funeral home in Washington kind of works with a funeral home in Oregon to say, we've got a death here, they have a plot in an Oregon cemetery, or they have a contract maybe with an Oregon funeral establishment. So I'm not sure if there's necessarily a solve to that. I think that's just kind of the base. And, maybe the other group has some other things who have actual funeral directors there, but I just think that's kind of just kind of the nature of how things are set up. And then things obviously aren't can't, things are not as seamless when you're dealing with, two states.
Yeah.
One that, and especially when they have differing laws and rules and requirements, and, you're kind of relying on that state to kind of get their part done to where you can, funeral directors can do their job in Oregon. That's kind of I'm just kind of making assumption here on what kind of Derek explained. And that makes sense to me as far as a topic being brought up.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have any ideas for this one.
No.
This neighboring state would be California. And I honestly would have no idea where to even begin. And oftentimes, because of where you can cross here, we have people from California come up here looking for healthcare because there's nothing around where they are. So that's another thing that we run into. But the vital records one, I haven't got a clue.
Okay, so I just took notes on, we're just expanding the clear issues involved in working with issues that are just not as seamless as Chad was saying, state to state. But maybe we could circle back to that one. And perhaps it might be a little bit involved with number 6, if we move on to that, for all death certificates to be fully electronic. And that also may go into number 7 with the idea of having a modernized, functional, effective system that everything's fully electronic, access to all old and new records. But I think the important distinction that's like death certificates along with all vital records. So thoughts about that one? I guess we're doing 6 and 7, but let's maybe start with 6 with death certificates in particular.
I'll
guess-
Chad,
go
I'll
ahead.
speak a bit about it. It's my understanding that Washington State has a law that requires all death certificates to be done electronically. And I don't know the specifics of the laws or whatever, but I would assume, their equivalent of health authority has implemented legislation that has done that. And then assumedly their equivalent of their medical board, who licenses and regulates doctors, kind of encourages that, I guess, or would. So I think there's been talks, encouragement, I think, especially by funeral directors, to have vital records make that a requirement in Oregon, that all doctors are signed up on OVERS and complete that via electronic versus paper. I don't, and that's seems like some heavy lifting, especially if it's legislative required. Derek, you may have some more insight on that, but that's kind of what I've heard from funeral directors, kind of just in conversations.
Yeah, I think it's a huge lift to get people signed up. A lot of people are excited about it. We've tried to remove barriers to it, but there are ultimately a lot of people that don't want to sign up for whatever reason. There's also issues with locum providers or providers from out of state and things like that. So we do a lot of outreach and a lot of work calling providers that sign hybrid records a lot. I think kind of connected, actually, I guess, to the number 5. I was thinking about whether we could work with neighboring states and their licensing boards, as well as Oregon's, to get sort of the data for all of their different people that might be signing certificates, so that there's sort of an auto enrollment in OVERS, and we don't have to, if somebody in Idaho has to sign one certificate and they rarely ever sign a death certificate, that they have to go through the full sign-up process and fill out all the forms just to sign one certificate. Something like that might be helpful. Or whether there's some sort of functionality that could be developed of like a one-time authorization login code. But of course, anything related to developing technology is extremely expensive and time consuming. So I do think for number 7, the idea was brought up last time, I think, of a one-time fund from the legislature to fund modernization and the, scanning and digitization of records that are on paper and microfilm and attaching those in overs. It would be a huge project, but something like that could be helpful. Those are currently only able to be issued in the state office. Some of them we even have to request from the archives before they can be issued, and they're very time consuming to do that.
Maybe that speaks a little bit to that idea about with number 7 of which was I kind of including the definition about being interoperable. But yeah, getting maybe across state, like whatever. Wouldn't that be interesting if we had interconnected systems that could actually move across state lines as well?
And there is some of that that happens. But every state is different as far as the registration and what requirements there are.
So that doesn't necessarily connect with the reciprocity or aspects.
I think that the better that things can match up between different states and we can find ways to work with other states is really great. For example, not only can Oregon certifiers certify, to my knowledge, but also certifiers in neighboring states. So, like that's an example. If we, had maybe a partnership with neighboring states to, have their records on who their medical certifiers are, so that we can know that somebody's authorized to certify, and we can send them the information to just log into overs without having to provide an ID or something like that, might be good examples of ways that we could work better with other states.
Great. More thoughts on this topic?
I have a question. This is just maybe out of ignorance, but when it talks about interoperable, are there systems within Oregon that have different, are there separate systems within the state of Oregon that is also being referenced, or is this more just talking about state to state kind of interactions?
I know that there are some efforts being, with being interoperable with transmitting data to the National Center for Health Statistics automatically. There's also work, other potential ways you can have interoperability is like an electronic health record at a hospital communicating information directly from their system to vital records. There's lots of stuff that can be done, but it is it's a process, and it's cutting edge stuff that's being worked on. So I think that's generally when they talk about interoperability, or whether it's the medical examiner system, transmitting that data back and forth seamlessly between different systems is what they are talking about.
Thank you.
Other questions, thoughts? Everything's welcome. We're still in getting it figured out, and whatever pops up is, welcome for sure. So, any other thoughts on the electronic? I mean, even if it seems aspirational or plausible or whatever, we're still in the brainstorming stage. Well, sustainable and equitable funding to support the system. There was which came up in the last session about and as Derek just mentioned, like maybe getting a one-time grant to modernize the system and get all of the records into the system, and then the hybrid, all of the things that are connected with that. Keeping that in mind, plus all the other things, how might this look? How might we meet this need? Sustainable and equitable funding to support the system.
I've been thinking a lot about this, and to me, the thing that I keep coming back to is that there needs to be some sort of county buy-in with the system, financial support of the system. Right now, counties issue certificates out of the system, OVERS, and rely on the registration, the amending, the statistics, the training, all the different support. But there isn't a support for that. And I think that's sort of the fundamental issue with that shift in where things are being issued. It's sort of fundamental to this problem, because if that funding shifts from the state to the county, that system's no longer supported, and the county can't issue either because none of those records are getting registered. None of them are being amended. There's no staff. So I think fee sharing of all certificates that are issued, or some sort of mechanism for the counties to invest, I think would help so that any changes like that are less impactful. I was doing some back of the napkin math, looking at like that slide that we presented about, what are the expenses by team for the state, and roughly 2/3 by my count was expenses like training, overs, all stuff for the system. So it's a big lift, and I think that sharing of that is going to be important.
Any thoughts about how that might look, or some creative thinking, or how that seems like, and what kind of mechanism or fee sharing? And so and if I got this correctly, 2/3 of the expense is training to use overs, or also like the maintenance and keeping up of overs, if I'm understanding correctly, Derek?
Or just general things that go towards the functioning of the system. So basically everything except for administration and the certification team, which is issuing certificates. Those,
Okay.
Other than those, it would, registering the records and
Okay.
amending them, those sorts of things. Very, back of the napkin math, but I think it sort of demonstrates. And I think as far as mechanism, personally, I think fee sharing of all certificates would be helpful. And then, maybe that opens it up that counties can issue for a year, and the county that they're in, so they have longer to issue, and there are less delays when there's a medical examiner case and things like that. They're not worrying about going up against that 6-month mark, but it's not completely wide open, because that introduces issues of, like they're ordering a record that's on microfilm that the county doesn't, there's not a way to get that to the counties. So trying to mitigate that issue. And I think keeping it to the county where the event occurred is a great option, just because of the competition aspect of small and large counties and the state all competing against each other, and how that really favors the large counties in the state, and just the volatility that would, introduce. I live in fear of, this county has to lay off all of their employees because they have one main funeral home customer, and they got mad because they wouldn't issue an order, and so they are going to get all their certificates from another county, and that sort of thing I think would be just really hard to deal with. So maybe that might be a good option.
Right, that really looks at the sustainable and equitable, so that there's a distribution, or it's not causing some kind of pivot or volatility. Sorry, my air conditioning vent just snapped. Back on that. Okay, I guess I want to keep a little bit eye on time and see if we can get through some more here too. And but I also don't want to, if everyone's thinking about it, has anything else you want to add before we move on to number 9? Okay, so 9 being adequately staffed with adequately trained employees with adequate classification.
I had a question
So-
about this one, I guess.
Mhm.
Is it that based on the current job market, like many private sector, public sector, entities, difficult to hire people, find people? Is it an issue of person power or revenue, I guess, to create those positions, I guess is my question. Is it we have the revenue, we just can't find the people, or is it we need the revenue to have the people and sufficient training thereafter and appropriate positions and that type of thing?
I think it's a little bit of all problems that,
Mhm.
there's not a way to get more revenue, or that the revenue is an issue. There's not popular ways or easy ways to increase revenue. Um, I think one of the things that I see a lot, and I used to work in as an amendment specialist. The positions in vital records require a lot of very specialized knowledge. It requires a lot of training, a lot of years, and they do not pay, you know, they don't pay for that. So you're getting sort of low to mid-level, entry-level pay for a very difficult, high stakes position. And so they move on. People use it as a position to get their foot in the door and then leave. And we're very dependent on some, people that have very specialized knowledge but are not being compensated very highly, that if they were to lose, the system would be in big trouble.
And I think if I remember correctly too, when this came up about adequate classification, that like that's not like an easy thing to move. There's a process to go through, that if you need somebody at that level of the specialization, that there needs to already be a classification for that, or a way to move into that classification. I don't know. I'm just remembering a little bit of the discussion. I'm not sure that's accurate.
Yeah, it's not easy to change the classifications. So a lot of the job responsibilities have changed over time, but the classification and what they're being paid has not been changed. So yeah, it's hard when there are high turnover positions that require a lot of training before you're really able to function well in them.
Got it. Okay, so with that clarity, any thoughts on creative ways to meet this need of juggling the revenue, being compensated for the level of specialization, mitigating the turnover?
I'm curious, I have a question about the classification for other counties. For the staff that process birth or death certificates, what's their classification? Am I clear?
So what is the classification for?
Yeah,
could you-
like in county staff that process birth and death, what is their position classification? What's the level? I'm just curious to compare to Clackamas.
Janet or Joy might be able to speak to that more than I would, but from seeing just job titles of different county people, it seems like there's a very wide range, and that it might also have a lot to do with what their other responsibilities are. It's very different, county to county. Sometimes it's all they do is vital records, and others it's like they're also the county clerk or something else. Yeah, I think it. Yeah, go
For
ahead, Janet.
us, we call my wonderful lady a program specialist because she not only is the main vital records person, but also, excuse me, is environmental health, front desk, and still dog licensing. So,
What kind of licensing? Sorry.
what's that?
What kind of licensing did you mention? Dog?
It's dog licensing.
Okay.
Oh, and kennel licensing, which is not even our department, but somehow we get to do it. So, yes, so program specialist,
Okay, thank you.
of course.
In my county, I am not only the vital records registrar, I am also the recording supervisor and administrator of the office and many other jobs.
And you also process birth and death, or you have the staff for that?
I do it myself now.
Okay.
We're very short-staffed right now,
Okay.
trying to hire people.
Okay, thank you.
But we've got more. Oh, looks like we're closing out. We didn't quite get to, well, there's number 10 about the easier access to overs with a longer timeout, which may go into the overall technology heavy lifting of those things. And then our new items, but we will be adding this to, sorry to give y'all homework over the summer, but was just wanting to make sure, especially with summer being like, if people can't make it to the meeting, and making sure it's hard sometimes in the afternoon to think of everything you wanted to think about. And so it'll give you some more time on your own. And we really want to make sure we hear everyone's thoughts and you can gather all the information from everyone. So those two, the new ones will be added into the worksheet.